Welcome back once again to the second part of the ranking where we dive in and rank all base game Elden Ring bosses based on how well they would compete in the Summer Olympics. Now, I know fall is here and the games are like well done, but I am here to finish this tier list and continue on to the next one. In the previous video, we went with the following criteria: work ethic, optimism, confidence, discipline, motivation, and competitiveness. Here's the first part of the bosses we went over, which I'm not going to include in this second part, just so it is easier on the eyes, but I will include an overall tier list of both part 1 and part 2 bosses at the end of this video. Let's finally continue on with this tier list and dive right back in and see who is an Olympic optimist and who is a lethargic lazybones. So to continue on where we finished off with the Godskin Noble, we now have the more slender variant of the two, the Godskin Apostle. Same lore basically, except the Apostle has a twin blade that is used as a big old peeler. I do find the Apostle to be a little bit of a better worker in that they would compete a little bit harder than that of the Noble, but otherwise they're just about the same. I think the Apostle would be good at something like artistic gymnastics due to their twin blade dancing abilities. So I'm going to go ahead and place the Godskin Apostle one tier above the Noble and put them into the D tier. So now we have the worms such as the Magma and Great Worm, who were once humans that partook in the dragon's communion and are now doomed to roam the earth as the flightless, gross-looking dragons they are. Now, they have had their humanity corrode over time, and so they are just destructive and gross dragon-like creatures that don't understand anything but beating up some poor old Tarnished. So I'll just skip to the end, where I give the worms the hurdles event, in which they would run everything over, and of course, with that, I'm going to go ahead and give them the lowest tier of F tier. So now we move on to the quickest rated boss probably on the entire channel, Decaying Ezekiels. With the Scarlet Rot, we're going to go ahead and of course place them all the way at the bottom as well into the F tier. No competition. Keep them home, maybe in some form of a protective bubble, and let's move on. So now we move on to the legendary Commander O'Neill, a commander of the battle that took place in the stinky swamp of Caelid. Now, Commander O'Neill may have had his mind gone, but still at least leads his men to fight, so he definitely would be excellent in some sort of leadership role. I think he's fantastic in discipline and the competitive spirit, motivation, confidence, and optimism, but does not have too much of a work ethic and instead thinks only of battle and just wanders around. Commander O'Neill is definitely material to lead in the canoe slalom event, looking like Washington crossing the Delaware doing so. Overall, he is almost perfect, but I am going to go ahead and place Commander O'Neill one tier below S and put him into the A tier. So now we have the Nox duo, the Nox Swordstress and Nox Priest. Now, these fellows are just waiting on their dear old Lord of Night to return and lead them against the Greater Will. So they're just the basement dwellers of Elden Ring, sitting in the dark and talking about how their Lord of Night is their waifu. To me, I do not see much more beyond that with these two. They're just some more or less generic Elden Ring bosses. I'll go ahead and give them the duo event of Beach Volleyball, and with that, I'll just give them the middle tier of C tier. We move on to the Golems, but instead compromised of champions, the Gargoyles. Now, the Gargoyles, as previously stated, do have some champions parts embedded within them and given new life, which means that they might have been embedded with the competitive fire instilled within those original champions. With this construction, they may have some motivation, but otherwise, it is really anyone's guess. I think the Gargoyles are perfect for waving around some flags in the rhythmic gymnastics event, since they're so efficient with their assortment of weaponry. But overall, I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to place them into the D tier, because I do have concerns about them just being an Olympic athlete in general. Moving on, we have the crystallized bull with a pincer mouth, the falling star beast, as well as Astal, Stars of Darkness, who is a malformed version of the boss. Now, these beasts are also users of gravity magic, but unlike someone like the Onyx Lord, I think the falling star beast just does not have the ability to control it with precision and accuracy. So there's no subtlety to their tactics, just destruction, whether they be adolescent or as an adult. Astel and the Falling Star Beast are just not ready to try and beat Usain Bolt in the sprint, so I am gonna go and I'm gonna place them all the way at the bottom into the F tier. So now let's move on to one of the most well-known bosses in Elden Ring, Starscourge Radahn. Now Radahn is fascinated with battles and wars, so of course, is there any better way to display those loves than through fierce competition? I will note that Radahn has in fact been infected with scarlet rot and has somewhat lost his mind over time and may have even succumbed to it, but even through all of that, he still has his trusty steed Leonard and uses gravity magic just to ensure he can safely and securely ride him to this day. I think within that scarlet rotted mind, there is still that general-esque mind, and Radahn is capable in every category to perform to the highest standard. Of course, I will acknowledge Leonard once again and say that Radahn is born to compete in the equestrian event, and I of course will go ahead and place Starscourge Radahn all the way at the top into the S tier. So Battle Mage Hughes is next, and the lore of him boils down to him being a mage that loves to dish out justice and literally use a giant magic gavel to do it. So just think of a wizard who wants to dish justice. Battle Mage Hughes has a hunger and has a discipline due to him learning all of these magics, but is in an ever jail, so of course that does make it questionable in terms of his discipline. I mean, there's nothing much more to that, so I'll just give Hughes that hammer tossing competition, and I'm just gonna put him in the middle and put him into the C tier. Up next we have the heretical necromancer Garrus. First things first, he has a weapon called Family Heads that is said to resemble his wife and 2 children. Now, on one side, he is thinking at least of his wife and kids. On the other side, he remembers them by using their heads as a weapon to strike enemies. He does also summon vengeful spirits during the boss encounter, so he seems what I consider to be passionate, but is passionate in the wrong way, shape, and form. So he is motivated, but not disciplined. He is optimistic and has decent work ethic, but is a dirty competitor. Necromancer Garrus can use his spirit skulls to scare other swimmers in the freestyle swimming competition, or maybe to boost himself underwater so like others can't see him. But overall, Necromancer Garrus seems to be at least decent in most regards, and therefore I'm gonna place him into the B tier. So let's move on to the Scottie Pippen of Godric's family, Godefroy, who's just trapped inside an Everjail. Now, Godefroy is the likely ancestor of Godric, and it is suggested that he began grafting way before Godric. He was also trapped in the Everjail by ancient dragon knight Kristoff, so Godefroy is close in lineage to Godric, but at least Godefroy was defeated in battle and did not grovel like Godric. I mean, there's nothing much more to that, but I'll go ahead and follow up in both the sport of badminton and the B tier for Godefroy, making him the same as Godric. So now let's move on to the 3 demi-human queens. For demi-human culture, the men are sent off to fight in battles while the women study and learn, which is why they are capable to cast spells. The demi-human queens are more intelligent than the average demi-human, and so I think the queens would have some decent discipline and motivations, but are otherwise pretty bad in the rest of the categories as they are still a bit feral for being a demi-human. I think that these queens would compete in the 200-meter sprint event and would look like a bloodhound since they like to run around on all 4s. Overall, I think the demi-human queens, although a little bit disciplined, are still not the best to compete in the Olympics, and therefore I'm going to go ahead and place them into the D tier. So now we move on to the missionary of the accursed blood, the sanguine noble, who's ready to go door to door and gather some blood for the sake of their lord and savior Mohg. The sanguine nobles are definitely disciplined in serving their lord, there is no denying that. They are also definitely competitive, but of course this competition is to gather stuff for Mohg, not really anything else. The Sanguine Noble would 1000% compete in the Olympics, but just to try and do what must be done to establish the new dynasty, so their heart is definitely in the wrong place. The Sanguine Noble would compete in fencing for sure because of their blood-drawing weaponry, and with that, I'll go ahead and I'm going to place them in the middle into the C tier. So let's go into a deep discussion about the boss, Wormface. F tier. Let's move on. Following up the Garbo Wormface, we have the Perfumer Tricia. To display her ultimate sportsmanship on a mantle, she is the one who dedicated her time and efforts to heal those who were deemed impure. So when she whoops up on the competition and receives her gold medal, she will go down to each and every contestant and personally congratulate and comfort them and tell them how good they did. I find that Perfumer Tricia only fights in defense of those impure when the Tarnished arrive, and that she is ready to do anything to help them. So she clears in all categories in this case. I think she would do some events such as BMX mountain biking, since she is good at rushing over to places, since she is a medic. I find Perfumer Tricia to be top tier material, and as such, I will place her all the way at the tip top into the S tier. So up next is the staffed centipede creature that sounds like a wet fart every time it makes noise, the Kindred of Rot. I mean, they're just bug people who worship Scarlet Rot, so we all know that there would be no competition if they're there due to the Tarnished seeking missiles, and would probably stink up the arena with Scarlet Rot. Put the bug folk in the handball competition if they have to compete, and of course I'm going to place them all the way at the bottom into the F tier. Following that up, we have the Iron Maiden wielding 2 giant pizza cutters, the Abductor Virgin. Now they are associated with Volcano Manor and were built for the prime directive of grabbing and transporting their victims so they can be interrogated. Now due to the passage of time, they have lost that ability to transport, so they instead just give one big tight hug to their victims instead. I think the Abductor Virgins would just be a spectator who the winner of an event would run up to and receive the world's tightest hug from. And of course, we're going to follow up the Kindred of Rot and place them also into the F tier. So now we move on to the God-devouring serpent, or better yet, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Now, Rykard basically sought out power and came upon a serpent god who he made a pact and became one with. I mean, he has the motto of defeat and eat, as he did with thousands of Tarnished and even made a blade out of them, the Blasphemous Blade. With his determination to make a pact with a serpent, Rykard would absolutely crush in just about any event, and in turn would be the only contestant to receive the medal after the competition, as for some reason the second and third place contestants have seemingly just gone missing. I will give Rykard the backstroke swimming event, and even though he will literally devour the competition, I'm going to be nice, and with his determination alone, keep him out of the F tier and put him into the E tier. Following along, we meet the 2 fellows with the removed horns who just want to help some fellow Tarnished, the Fel twins. Now, the twins are omen babies who were born into a royal family, meaning their horns are excised and are basically cast aside and must fend for their own, if they even live past the horn procedure. I find that the Fel twins, even though they do deceive us Tarnished and bring us into this pitch black arena, are a couple of street kids who learned how to survive and possibly thrive given their misfortune. So they may not have the best in terms of the character they have, but by gosh do they have some optimism and cunning that I think is generally overlooked. So they don't have nor have been taught common courtesies, but they would know how to win in the most obscure way possible. With their teamwork and voluptuous bodies, I think the Fel twins should be a good beach volleyball team. Now, I feel that most would consider the Fel twins lower tiers, but I mean, I feel alright with putting them in the middle into the C tier. From Omen rags to riches, we now have the legendary Morgot, the Omen King. Now, let's note that I did rank his alter ego Margit in part 1 in the B tier, but now we have a whole new fire inside him. A whole new personality that seems to show much more feeling, and of course we now have a blade full of his accursed blood. I especially respect Morgot's desire to protect the Erd Tree, even after the Golden Order talks so much mess about him. He would represent the Erd Tree with such pride that he would shed so many tears just from seeing like a normal oak tree outside the arena. Morgot is a bit more excited and nimble than his alter ego, and with that I feel confident enough to place Morgot the Omen King all the way into the tip top into the S tier. And yes, I did think about Morgot talking about his fellow demigod siblings as traitors, but come on, Morgot was loyal since day one, and I think he did get betrayed in more ways than one. We move from son to the father of it all, Godfrey the Golden. Now, I do feel somewhat bad for Godfrey as he was betrayed by that snake Queen Marika and became one of the very first Tarnished, but Godfrey still carried on, being one of the best warriors and capable of just about anything. When we enter the arena, we find Godfrey mourning the loss of Morgot, but instead of blaming us for the loss, he instead acknowledges us for our brute capabilities, and even when we defeat him, he acknowledges us as worthy to wear the crown. Godfrey does whatever it takes in all fairness to win, but accepts his situations and defeat with such honor and pride that I find Godfrey to probably be the highest contestant on this tier list. I think Godfrey, especially when he becomes Hoaraloo, would be best suited for a competition such as wrestling, but it would be due to the WWE style move he has. With that, of course, I'll go ahead and follow up and place Godfrey the Golden all the way at the tip top into the S tier. So now we move on to the Mimic tier, which in turn just copies your character and you fight yourself. Of course, as a bit of advice, let me say, if you do find yourself having a hard time with this boss fight, just take off all your equipment and walk in and then just put it back on. So you're just fighting yourself in a loincloth. So basically I'm gonna rank the Mimic tier how I would rank a normal player Tarnished character. I think that we as fellow Tarnished are capable of both good and bad. We are honorable or untrustworthy, going for a cool ending or helping out the Dung Eater. I think we are neither good nor bad in terms of pretty much everything, but I will say that we are dedicated individuals as we continue to press on, or at minimum grind and level up and come back later when we are over leveled. Overall, you could put the Mimic tier in just about any event as it would just mimic another contestant that is likely to win gold. But overall, I find that the Mimic tier is one who I would feel okay with, even though the best case scenario of that is that it ties for gold. With that, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna give the Mimic tier the B tier. So now we move on to the macho redhead fire giant, who is the last of his kind. Now, Queen America basically forced this fire giant to tend to the flames of his fell god for an eternity, until we stroll up and want to use that flame to burn down one big ol' Erd tree. I do feel bad for this fire giant being forced to such a monotonous task for the rest of his life, and that he was betrayed by his troll brethren, who of note I did rate in part 1 into the B tier. With his dedication to the flame of his fell god, whether it be by choice or by Queen America forcing him to keep it lit, I find that the fire giant to be pretty admirable in that regard. He was dealt a pretty bad hand in life and seems to at least be scraping by. I do have to question his physical limitations though just a bit, as he does have a bit of a bum left leg that he decides he doesn't have a need for after phase 2 and decides to make a worthy sacrifice with it. I think that the fire giant could have a lot of potential in shot put, but instead uses his stomach mouth as a launcher, spitting it out at incredible velocities. And with that, I will keep the fire giant out of the S tier, but go ahead and throw him into the A tier. So now we move on to the leader of an army with no nation, Commander Niall. The commander himself is the defender of his master Godwyn's grave, and someone who offered his own prosthesis in exchange for defeated knights. I do find that to be quite noble of him, even though he probably leads the spectral army to defend Castle Sol, to live out his days and pray for Godwyn's return and nothing more. That's the dedication needed. And someone can convince Niall to engage himself in learning and participating in a sport, he would do it all day, every day, using his spectral knights as practice partners or coaches. I think that Commander Niall would do something that is more of a long-term event, such as marathon swimming, where he could replace his prosthesis with a finned prosthesis. Overall, I admire Commander Niall's dedication to continually care for Godwyn, and so I do find that unwavering dedication and skill of his good enough to place him all the way at the tip top into the S tier. Following Niall, we move to the almost Elden Lord Roundtable Knight Vyke. Vyke was once a proud warrior that was taught dragon incantations and even had one named after him, Vyke's Dragon Bolt, but somehow Vyke met and was scorched by the frenzied flame and was somehow trapped in an Everjail. Now, as a frenzied red lightning warrior, Vyke is just a bit gone mentally, but still has the physical capability needed. I think that he would be an alright competitor, but would not know what to do or how to act after his competition is over, such as shaking hands or congratulating the competition. Vyke would obviously be a javelin thrower with his red lightning, and with that, I think that Roundtable Knight Vyke deserves the D tier. as I do question whether that sanity would let him compete at all in the first place. And yes, I do know he was the closest to becoming Elden Lord, but still, I just question that sanity. So now we move on to one of the most legendary boss fights of Elden Ring, where we fight Malenia, Blade of Miquella. Malenia and her brother Miquella were both afflicted, with Malenia losing a few appendages to Scarlet Rot, and during her battle with Radahn, caused Caelid to go from such a beautiful landscape to that. Malenia has her mind and heart set on defending her brother to the very end, which is admirable, and she definitely could beat anyone at anything with her competitive fire. She's dedicated and seems to be a pretty good competitor, as part of her final words make us blush because she calls us a true lord. Malenia is one that I find to have very elegant and beautiful attacks, so I think she would be best in diving, maybe using her bloom to show off some more beauty until the entire pool becomes infested with Scarlet Rot. Now, of course, there's the question of the competitor's safety, but I'm just so heart-struck, so excited for her to compete that I'm going to give Malenia, Blade of Miquella, the highest tier of S tier. Following Malenia, we have the giant deer carcass, the Ancestor spirit, who I must say bothers me with how much they move around the arena, even though it is quite a beautiful boss fight. The Ancestor spirit follows the idea that life can be made from death as it can from birth, and this is reflected by their horns, who grow even on a decaying body. The Ancestor spirit beyond that is a giant decaying deer that would engulf the arena that it competes in with the foul odors that are produced from it. I think that this would be one of those bosses who does not wish to battle, as its mindset is too whimsical and too spiritual to not see the reason behind competing for anything. At least it would be a nice competitor, but definitely would not be a competitive competitor. And with that, I'm going to keep the Ancestor spirit above the F tier and throw them into the E tier. Up next, we have the Dragonkin soldiers, who are beings who were created to replicate dragons but are failed mockeries. These poor soldiers just live in the internal cities and are just sitting around all day until some form of battle comes along. I find that these lanky fellows do not know how to compete in any sort of sporting event, nor even know how to really express any emotion beyond rage, but this is not really their faults due to their creators. They're just ignored creatures who do not have a true purpose, so maybe they can find their purpose through Olympic athletics. I think that the best competition for the Dragonkin soldiers would be something like squash, as they do flail around well enough to play in that event, but sadly I'm going to go ahead and place the Dragonkin soldiers all the way at the bottom into the F tier, as they would just be better suited to stay at home and do something else. We move on to the basement dweller of the accursed twins, Mohg, Lord of Blood. Now, Mohg accepted his accursed blood and basically became this black sheep of the royal family, and decided to meet up with the formless mother to ignite his accursed blood. Mohg is one who I immediately question in for the sportsmanship, claiming he needed opponent's blood for religious purposes. Mohg does have the power and the drive, as he does keep talking about the birth of his new dynasty. So he obviously means the dynasty of gold medals him and his servants are about to acquire over the years in hockey. But overall, I am not too convinced Mohg would be best suited to compete, so I'm gonna keep him in the E tier. Next up is Fia's champions, a total of 5 spectral champions who are basically people who have just done stuff with Fia. As the ultimate simp squad, Fia's champions are the ones who would do anything that their main mistress would ask them, including competing in the Olympics. If Fia were to ask one of them to compete on her behalf, they would be walking out of there with a minimum of 5 gold medals, or else they couldn't lay with their lady. That's really all that needs to be said about them. For their competition, maybe they would do best in the wrestling or judo competitions, as they are known to enjoy hugs. With that, I'm gonna keep the simp squad into the B tier. Following up, we now have Maliketh, the Black Blade, half-brother of Queen Marika. Maliketh has the adorable nickname Death of the Demigods due to his death-imbued blade and his bestial demeanor with the hunger to devour some delicious deathroot dessert. So once again, we come to the has the heart, that's about it, sort of Olympic athlete that Maliketh would be. I mean, at least he does cry out to Marika. Give him the climbing event, as I have a major feeling he has such grip strength that he would crush it and put Maliketh in the mid tier at the C tier. So as stated in part 1, I will be going over dragons who are distinct enough from the normal Elden Ring dragons, and here is one for sure. We have Dragon Lord Placidusax. Now, this legendary Dragon Lord came before the time of the Erd Tree, at a time when ancient dragons ruled above all. As he awaited his god's return, he simply went into the heart of the storm beyond time and waited until us silly little gooses showed up looking for the Rune of Death. Now, this two-headed dragon is to me a bit more intelligent and above all patient, more so than the normal dragons. It knew how to lead, and above all else, it knew how to accept defeat pretty well, as he stayed loyal and waited for his god even as the rule of the ancient dragons dwindled. Of course, it is a giant two-headed dragon that is more than capable of destroying anything in its wake, but Placidusax seems at least capable to hold itself back. I think that it would be a good athlete in water polo, using the two long-necked heads to catch and throw that ball like no other. Overall, I'm going to place Dragon Lord Placidusax into the A tier, keeping it out of the S tier just as it is a bit of a wild card. Moving on, we now have Sir Gideon Ofnir the All-Knowing, who is one of our fellow supporters at the Round Table Hold. He knows that we are attempting to become Elden Lord after we burn the Erd Tree, and is well intent on stopping us from doing so by any means necessary. Now, it is speculated that he's an accomplice of Marika and has always been working for her from the beginning, but just recently learned something that has terrified him about Queen Marika. So, Sir Gideon is somewhat loyal, but not extremely, and seems to be one dedicated individual going out of his way to try and stop us from becoming Elden Lord. I think he is one individual who knows his place and knows what to do and when to do it. Sir Gideon Ofnir is an excellent candidate to compete in something like road cycling, given that he knows how to survive and last until the end. And with that, I find that Sir Gideon Ofnir, the All-Knowing, is a fantastic example of an Olympic athlete, and with that, I'm going to give him the very tip top and put him into the S tier. We move on to the first opponent of the final boss fight, where we have Radagon of the Golden Order, with his flowing red locks and golden chest carving embedded in him. Now, Radagon had 2 entire wars with his soon-to-be wife, Rennala, and he did repent and wed her, so I think that says a lot about his character and humility, and would graciously accept a silver medal if he came in second place. Now, he is basically one big cool-looking tool for the Elden Beast, which in turn could be said about Olympic athletes and their countries or something, but this channel doesn't dive into stuff too deep or anything like that. I just rate for fun and to answer questions that everyone asks. Now, I find Radagon to be one cool cucumber, even after the shattering, and simply used his big ol' hammer to try and fix the Elden Ring. With all that being said, Radagon seems like the type who, in my opinion, needs a competition that's like a break for him. So I'm going to give him a cool guy competition and let him surf to his heart's content. And with that being said, I do find Radagon of the Golden Order the perfect contestant to throw all the way at the tip top into the S tier. Now, finally on this tier list, we come to the giant space slug Elden Beast. The Elden Beast could be a multitude of things, including the manifestation of the greater will. It could also just be a defensive beast ever since Marika shattered the Elden Ring and caused all of this commotion and whatnot. But I think the beast still has some ulterior motive, which means the sportsmanship of the beast is probably a bit lacking. Do not get me wrong, I think that the beast still is quite capable for the Olympic events in terms of motivation and competitiveness, but it is a morally gray character that I could see manipulating fellow competitors and allies alike. The Elden Beast is one who would absolutely dominate in water polo, given the gelatinous form that could jiggle and move around the water to dominate from start to end. But in the end, I find the Elden Beast to be a competitor who is good, but not great or perfect. And therefore, I'm going to finish off this tier list and place the Elden Beast into the B tier. And now we have another of life's greatest questions solved. Although the competition is well beyond over and the athletes are now back home with their medals and whatnot, we can now know which Elden Ring bosses could help and dominate the competition to take back medals of their own. Now, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, here is the complete and total tier list of both Part 1 and Part 2 bosses, and I have to say, I think I nailed this one, guys, with absolutely no issues whatsoever. If there are issues, leave it in the comments, but I got this one, guys. Now, tune in for the next video where we move on and answer another question that I know has been in the back of your mind since day one. Yeah, You know which one I'm talking about. And of course, if you enjoyed this content, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, folks, adios.